Vanguard sells 3 dividend ETFs that look like the exact same. About 0.06% a year. Put $100,000 into VYM today, and historically, it has thrown off somewhere around $2,300 a year in dividends. That's real money landing in your account right now, this year. For a retiree who needs the cash to actually pay bills, that immediate yield is genuinely attractive. And look at how it's built, because the design tells you everything. About a fifth of VYM sits in financial services, with a healthy slice of energy and industrials layered on top. That tilt is exactly why VYM pays more today. Those are mature, cash-heavy businesses that hand a big chunk of their profit straight back to shareholders instead of plowing it into growth. So if your single goal is the biggest possible check this quarter, VYM's whole structure is quietly working in your favor. But here's the one thing you absolutely have to know about VYM before you fall in love with it. If you already own SCHD, you basically already own most of VYM. The two funds overlap by roughly 86%. Same stocks, different label. So buying both isn't diversifying. It's mostly just buying the same thing twice and feeling busy. VYM is a perfectly valid choice. I want to be crystal clear about that. It is not a bad fund. It's just not nearly as different from what you might already hold as that name makes it sound. Know the overlap, and VYM earns its place. Now door 2. VIG, the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation Fund. And this. This is the one I wish I had truly understood years ago. VIG does not chase the biggest yield. In fact, up front it looks worse than VYM. The yield is only about 1.5%. On that same $100,000, VIG pays you around $1,500 in year one. That's a few $100s less than VYM hands you. So why on earth would a smart investor pick the one that pays less? Because of what VIG demands from every single company it lets in the door. To make it into this fund, a company has to have raised its dividend for at least 10 straight years. 10 years of raises, in a row, no exceptions. That one rule does something quietly powerful. It filters out the fragile, the lucky, and the soon-to-be cut. and it leaves you with proven razors. And the result shows up in the numbers that actually matter. VYM's dividend has grown at about 3.8% a year. VIG's dividend has grown at a little over 10% a year. Read that again, slowly. One fund hands you more cash today. The other one hands you a faster raise, every single year, automatically. On top of that, historically VIG has returned around 13% a year over the past decade, and it has tended to stay calmer than the broader market in the ugly years like 2022. That's a tech-leaning, growth-oriented dividend fund that asks for one thing in return: patience. And patience here has historically been rewarded. And notice something most people completely miss. VYM and VIG aren't even making the same bet. VYM leans into financials and energy, the income-heavy corners of the market. VIG leans the other way, into technology and healthcare, the names that reinvest and compound. So these two were never really apples to apples in the first place. It's income style versus growth style, dressed up in matching Vanguard packaging. And in the brutal sell-off of 2022, that 10-year raise discipline is a big part of why VIG tended to hold up better than a lot of nervous investors expected. The companies that can keep raising dividends through a downturn are usually the ones built to survive it. Which brings us to door 3, VDIG. And honestly, this is the most interesting fund on the whole list. VDIG is brand new. It launched in November of 2025. Think about what that means. As I'm recording this, it is barely 7 months old. It's Vanguard's first ever actively managed dividend growth ETF, run by the respected team at Wellington, and a lot of people see it as Vanguard's direct answer to SCHD. The strategy is to hunt for high-quality companies with durable earnings that are willing to keep raising their payouts. Names like Broadcom, Eli Lilly, Alphabet, Microsoft, and MasterCard sit right at the top. But here is where you have to slow down and be careful, because VDIG is different from the other two in 3 big ways. First, it's tiny. It is managing only around $25 million, while VIG manages well over $100 billion. Second, it's concentrated. It holds just 34 companies versus more than 500 inside VYM. When you own 34 stocks, a single bad pick hurts a lot more. And third, it's expensive, at least by Vanguard standards. VDIG charges 0.4% a year. VIG charges 0.05. That is 8 times the fee for essentially the same mission. Now, an active fund can absolutely be worth a higher fee if it actually beats the cheaper option over time. That's the entire bargain. But that's also the whole problem with crowning VDIG today. It is far too young to have proven anything. There is no 5-year record. There is no 10-year record. There isn't even a full year of dividends to study yet. So, is VDIG worth watching? Absolutely. It could genuinely turn into something special, and I'll be following it closely. But is it worth betting your retirement on right now, on faith alone? That is a very different question. Worth watching is not the same thing as proven. Don't let a shiny launch trick you into either one. And here's the deeper trade you're making the moment you pick VDIG. Concentration cuts both ways. With only 34 holdings, when Wellington's picks are right, VDIG could potentially shine far brighter than a sleepy index of 500 names. But when those picks are wrong, there's nowhere to hide. That's the real bargain of going active over a plain index fund. You're paying a premium, and you're handing the steering wheel to a manager, betting their judgment beats the market's average year after year. Sometimes that bet pays off beautifully. Often, over long stretches, it quietly doesn't. That's not a knock on VDIG specifically. It's just the math of active management, and it's why the higher fee deserves real scrutiny, not blind trust. So far, this sounds simple, right? VYM for cash now, VIG for the raise, VDIG for someday. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and here's the SCHD piece I promised you. SCHD is the foundation that almost every dividend investor measures everything else against. It yields around 3.5%, and get this, its dividend has grown at roughly 13% a year. That's even faster than VG, so when you really line up VDIG versus VIG versus VYM, what you're actually doing is asking how each one stacks up against that SCHD yardstick. VYM is the cheaper near twin. VIG is the faster grower with a longer, calmer track record. And VDIG is the new contender, still trying to earn a seat at that same table. Keep that frame in your head, because it changes everything about the next part. Now the part I told you to wait for, the crossover. This is the thing that flips the whole comparison. Remember, VYM starts you off with more income, about $2,300 on that $100,000 versus around $1,500 for VIG. If you stop the story right there, VYM looks like the obvious, easy winner. But income isn't a snapshot, it's a movie. VYM's payment grows slowly, at that 3.8%. VIG's payment grows much faster, at over 10% a year. So every single year that passes, the gap between them shrinks a little more. And if those historical growth rates were to roughly hold, somewhere around year 8, VIG's annual income quietly passes VYM's. After that, VIG doesn't just catch up, it keeps pulling away, year after year, paying you more and more while VYM crawls forward. That is the twist almost nobody mentions in a VYM versus VIG comparison. The fund with the smaller starting yield can become the bigger paycheck, if you simply give it enough time. Let that sink in, because it might be the most important idea in this entire video. A lower yield with faster growth can quietly beat a higher yield with slow growth, but only on a long enough timeline. Shorten the timeline, and the higher yield wins instead. Which means the real question was never which one pays the most today. It was always how long you actually plan to hold. Let me make that concrete. Imagine an investor we'll call Harry. Harry puts $100,000 to work and he's torn between VYM and VIG. In the early years, the high-yield fund pays him more, and he feels great about that choice. But if he can simply leave it alone, if he doesn't need that cash for a decade or longer, the dividend grower could potentially overtake it and then keep climbing from there. Same starting money. Wildly different ending, and the only variable that decided it was time. Now, flip the situation. If that same investor actually needed the income in the next 2 or 3 years to live on, then the early lead from the higher yield matters far more than a crossover he'd never stick around to see. Neither answer is wrong. They just belong to two completely different people in two completely different seasons of life, so let's settle the 3-door test for good. Door 1, income today. That's VYM. If you're retired or nearly there, and you need the dividend to pay real bills this year, the higher yield wins, and you knowingly accept slower growth. Just check the SCHD overlap before you double up on the same stocks. Door 2, the raise. That's VIG. If you've got time on your side, and you'd rather your income grow into something genuinely large than start large and stall out, the dividend grower has historically been the stronger long game play. Door 3, the wild card. That's VDIG. If you like the idea of an active manager hunting for the next decade's dividend champions, and you can treat it as a small watch-and-learn position rather than a core holding, it's a genuinely fascinating fund to follow. Just please don't pretend a 7-month-old fund has a track record. It simply doesn't. Not yet. So here's the honest answer to which Vanguard Dividend ETF actually wins. None of them wins for everybody. VYM wins the first several years on pure income. VIG has historically won the long game on growing income and steadier behavior. And VDIG is the one to watch, not the one to crown, at least until it has lived through one real, painful market cycle. The mistake was never picking the wrong one. The mistake is picking the biggest number on the screen without first asking how long you're holding